never perfect, but you're perfect to me. I've worked, been asleep, you're a dream, I need you. Though we got a past, I want you. And even when it's bad, I love you. I've been waiting my whole life to find someone like you. Find someone like you. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I've been waiting my whole life to find someone like you. Find someone like you. Oh, baby, baby, I want this. Oh my, I want this to last forever. Oh yeah, baby, I want this. Can we make this last forever? Make it last, yeah. Oh yeah,
Hello and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kalisha Davis, and I am the CS Equity Curriculum Project Director here at the Kapor Center. It's my sincere honor and pleasure to welcome all of you here today for the very first webinar in our Equitable Computer Science Curriculum Initiative. Next slide, please. If you're new to our work, Kpor is a national organization headquartered in Oakland, California, dedicated to removing barriers in STEM education and tech careers for underrepresented people of color. We do this by offering a comprehensive approach that spans from seeking inclusive practices for professionals of color, working in startup and tech companies, to social impact investing, to advocating for opportunities for children and youth to be exposed to the field through school-based programs and initiatives. This webinar, Translating Culturally Relevant Pedagogy to Computer Science, represents the very first of a series of conversations that we'll host monthly to shine a light on meaningful approaches to creating more culturally responsive, asset-based practices in computer science education. As many of you know, this series is directly linked to an even larger endeavor that you'll hear all about in just a moment. Next slides, please. Today's presentation will cover the following: an overview of the Equitable Computer Science Curriculum Initiative, our keynote presentation from Dr. Brian Brown. We'll have some time for Q&A with our team and guest presenter. And lastly, I'll share a few final notes about how to stay connected with us. This is certainly a very turbulent and uncertain time in cities and towns across the country. Our hope is to offer insights that focus on connectivity, collaboration, and the commonalities that we all share as advocates for children and young people bravely navigating their school communities in grades K through 12. We hope you'll enjoy today's presentation and look forward to staying in touch with you in the future. While you're listening today, if you have any questions over the course of this presentation, please feel free to drop them into the Q&A box, and we'll be sure to address as many as we can. Before we hear from today's guest speaker, we'd like to share a few words with you regarding the national initiative that sparked this series. Please allow me to introduce my colleague and the Chief Research Officer at Kapor Center, Dr. Allison Scott. Allison?
Thank you very much, Kalisha. Next slide, please. And I'd just like to say thank you for each of you all for joining us here today. We are thrilled to have you on this very first in our webinar series. As Kalisha mentioned, my name is Allison Scott. I'm the Chief Research Officer at the Kapor Center and really excited to be here today with each of you. Next slide, please. So I'd like to talk a little bit about the Equitable CS Curriculum Project, just to provide an overview about what the project is and what we're aiming to achieve through this project. So the problem that brings us all here today and that we spend a lot of time thinking about at the Kapor Center is the underrepresentation of Black, Latinx, and Indigenous students and girls across all levels of computer science education. And we know that there's been a lot of research and data about the lack of access to computer science courses, but beyond the opportunity for students to take courses, we know that there is a larger lack of opportunity for students to make meaningful connections between computer science, students' interests, their cultures, and broader social justice efforts. So we also know through decades of research across other disciplines that culturally relevant and responsive frameworks have been effective in increasing academic outcomes and in engaging students from all backgrounds. And so what we really thought would be an excellent opportunity for the computer science community is to think about how to provide equitable and rigorous computer science education and bridge the two communities together in conversation about ways to close gaps in computer science through culturally relevant and responsive computer science education. So this project is an exciting collaborative effort across educators, students, researchers, subject matter experts, and curriculum providers to examine and improve K-12 computer science curricula and resources, again with the intention to address inequity and increase CS engagement for all students, particularly those most underrepresented. Next slide, please. So we have a set of project activities outlined for the Equitable CS Curriculum Project. The first is bringing together a group of expert advisors through both an advisory board and also a student leadership team of students from across, a small group of students from across the country to help provide insights to guide the activities of the project. And we are really excited to have contributions from both of those groups. We are also, as many of you know, conducting a survey of teachers. We launched that survey in June in collaboration with the Computer Science Teachers Association, and we'll be closing that survey out soon, where we will get kind of a landscape of computer science teachers and their perspectives of culturally relevant CS curriculum and resources and what additional resources they might need to improve instruction. We also plan to develop a framework for how to approach and implement culturally relevant computer science education across grades K through 12. And finally, we are planning to convene the community in forums like this, virtually given COVID, but perhaps in person at some point, to share ideas, best practices, knowledge, and resources so that we can leverage frameworks to improve K-12 computer science curriculum. And then finally, in early 2021, we aim to fund a set of projects that will help us actually translate some of these frameworks and ideas and theories into practice. And we are excited about that. More to come on the RFP process. Next slide, please. So the project structure, just as I outlined, we very much view ourselves here at the Kapor Center as conveners of lots and lots of expertise around computer science education. So we have an advisory board, we have the landscape survey I just described, and a student leadership team that will all help to inform the direction of the project. And we will translate all of this information and share all of this information with the broader computer science community in hopes of transforming and taking action across a range of different contexts. Next slide, please. So our advisory board, we are thrilled to have this esteemed advisory board of experts across a wide variety of areas representing academia, representing professional societies, community organizations, and also the teaching profession. So many of these spaces might be familiar to you. We are thrilled. We had our first kickoff advisory board meetings last week, and are already very excited about the ideas and energy flowing from our advisory board. So next slide, please. I will kick it to Kalisha to provide an overview and present Dr. Brian Brown to you, but just a couple words from my perspective. We were super excited to have Dr. Brian Brown on our advisory board and also to have him kick off this webinar series, because as you will see from his presentation, he has been a leader in the space of culturally relevant science education for years and has thought very deeply and applied these concepts in science education. And we felt like this would be a great opportunity to learn from some of the work that's already been done and think about how this could be applied in computer science education. So with that, I will kick it back over to Kalisha to do a quick intro of Dr. Brian Brown, and we will get right into the presentation.
Thank you so much, Allison, for your insights about this project and the opportunities that it presents to the field. I'm really inspired by your vision for this work, and I'm really excited about launching this initiative with you. With that being said, please allow me to introduce Dr. Brian Brown, Associate Professor at Stanford University. Dr. Brown holds a Bachelor of Science from Hampton University, a master's degree in educational psychology from the University of California, and a PhD in educational psychology from UC Santa Barbara. His work focuses on the role of language in science teaching and learning, and he also studies how race, technology, language, and culture impact science teaching in urban schools. Dr. Brown, thank you so much for joining us, and we're eager to hear your presentation today.
All right, thank you for having me. I'm excited. I'm looking forward to having a good time with this group. I want to share my screen. Before we get started, I have to say I have a request, and that request is that we keep the chat lively. If I talk about it, I don't learn much, but if there's an exchange, we'll all benefit. And so I really want to hear your thoughts. I did this a few weeks ago for a group of administrators, and one of the comments was that this guy looks like, it's like listening to Ice Cube speak. And so I was a little thrown off by that particular comment, but I'll take whatever it takes to keep us moving, and we're going to have a good time. So the first thing I want to do is just give you the premise, right? There's a difference between acquisition and learning, right? And so if you forget everything I'm going to talk about, just remember this. The things you acquire, you remember those for a long time. So no one had to teach you English or Spanish or whatever your first language was. You acquired it. And what was it that drove that to happen? It was the need. So you learned about food first, right? Because you needed food. You learned, if you took a foreign language, a funny thing is you probably remember how to ask to go to the bathroom because it was an acquisition phrase, right? You learn essential things. So teaching is always about acquisition, and culturally relevant pedagogy is really about acquisition as well. So I'm going to start probably in a way that you are not expecting to talk about language. Language learning is easy, right? If you need to, right? But if I don't need to learn a language, then I have a problem. But language learning, and this is important for this context, is not neutral to identity. That is to say, you can't say the words that everyone else says and feel the same way, right? If you want to try it out, walk around Oakland calling everybody blood. That's an old school way. People used to greet each other. Hey, blood, what's happening, blood? How you doing, blood? You know, adopting other people's language makes you feel some kind of way. So because of that, there is a learning language challenge that you have to be attuned to when teaching code. It is important that you recognize that we need to make sure that students are acquiring it, but we're also sensitive to how people feel about language. And if you don't believe me, let me give you a quick example. So I'm going to show you, this is the problem with undefined language norms. And so this is a clip from the end of the national championship football game, maybe 2012. So you have to imagine the context. Young man, it's Jameis Winston, throws his touchdown. He scores, they win the national championship, and immediately a microphone's in his hand. He's 19 years old, and here's what he says.
15 to go in this game. Final drive. What did you tell your teammates around? I said, guys, we didn't come here for no reason. I said, guys, this is ours, man. This is all the adversity we went through. The first few quarters, it was ours to take. And like I just said, we control our own destiny. And those men looked me in my eye and they said, "We got this, James." And I said, "Are you strong?" They said, "I'm strong if you strong." I said, "We strong, men." After struggling through the first half, what was the biggest adjustment you guys made at halftime? We had to go back to playing Florida State football. We came out here, we were letting us be bigger than the game. We were bigger than the game. Then we had to say, "Hey, let's play Florida State football because can't nobody be bigger than this game." And we did that, and we came out victorious.
Okay, so minutes later, and this is 2014, January 7, 2014, Dee Dee McCarron, who just happens to be the mother of a quarterback who won the national championship the previous year. She says, "Am I listening to English?" Right? And it's also a way for me to use Twitter for research, right? And Reggie Bush commented on the same exact interview by saying, love listening to this dude, Jameis Winston, talk after games. He walks and talks like a true champion, a great role model for kids to look up to. So here's a question. How could two people hear the exact same thing? One person is questioning whether or not he's speaking English or not. The other person is like, this is brilliant, right? Another person named LeBron James, I don't know if you know who that is, but he says, unfreaking believable interview with Jameis, right? Just shows part of the reason why he's so special. Now, here's the problem with language. We all learn, I messed that up. We acquire language, but what is he supposed to sound like, right? So for example, if he would answer that question, tell me about how you felt about the game. He said, well, it was a fascinating competition. We were challenged with a complex situation. We lost our focus and the game was bigger than us, right? People would have joked that he didn't sound like a person who was from Alabama in the context of being a 19-year-old speaking to other young men who are predominantly from the South, from Georgia and Alabama, right? He spoke appropriate language for the context that he lived in. So here we go. The point is language is acquired, but it is not a neutral medium. People feel some kind of way about all language they learn, right? So why is that important? So we need to recognize that we allow the language norms to be left undefined. When you go into a classroom and a kid sees code on the board, right, regardless of what the coding language is that sending them a message that they don't belong there? Or are they comfortable, feeling uncomfortable about language, right? When we teach, we make a critical mistake, and don't do this. We play a game of guess what's inside my head. So every student comes to a class because they don't know what's in that class. So you show up in chemistry, the one thing you should not know, chemistry. You show up to a introductory CS class, the one thing you should not know is CS. But what do? We ask them lots and lots of questions about the thing that they don't know, right? And then if they don't offer the right answer, right, we go, oh, next person, right? It's guess what's in my head. But here's the problem, is if we allow the language norms, right, the games of language to be symbolic of learning, then kids who might know, right, fundamentally feel uncomfortable. And you're sending a constant message, right, that you do not belong, right? We by default value the culture of power. That is the language of the classroom. Now, kids know a lot about code. I work in schools all the time. What I'm noticing is they've learned to identify the source code, copy and paste the course code, find out where the icons are and images. And so if they want their clicker to be square, I'm messing this up. Square, I'm trying to say, oh my God, SpongeBob SquarePants, then they'll change the code so that their websites, their clicker can be SpongeBob, right? They're learning code intuitively, but we'll never figure out what it is that they know if we're not attuned to how language sends a message of belonging or not, right? So here's the simple question. How does learning work? So in the chat, give me 10 seconds of your time. Write it in the chat. If you had to explain to someone how learning works, what would you say? I would show your answers, but somehow my mouse disappeared. So I'm going to trust that you're writing it down. It's important, right? How does learning work? I'm going to give you a quick lesson. Did anybody remember these things on the left? I used to spin them and I would push the numbers in and I would call people, right? And I remembered every phone number. I remember my mother, my sister, my best friend, my uncles, and my cousins, right? At some point, I was no longer able to remember that cell phone number. I messed it up. Those phone numbers. It was completely deleted from my understanding. And like, if you're like me, you know that moment. The minute you got a phone that was able to swipe up and down and just tap the phone number. So here, I told you the premise of this whole thing, and this is where being in the same room would be important, right? Because I could hear that you understand it. It's acquisition, right? I didn't have to go to school to learn those numbers, right? The computers on our shoulders are amazing. They'll maintain information as long as we give ourselves opportunities. So here's the question. How did I remember those numbers? I remembered those numbers by having to punch them in, right? The power of explanation or the power of writing. So if we go to a class and the teacher is the person who's doing all the explaining, well, guess who is the person downloading all the information, right? It's the teacher. So an effective classroom has 30 kids constantly explaining, revising, explaining, revising, because in those moments, you are now acquiring that information. I hope that makes sense, right? So that's one of the key factors to learning. Anybody remember doing this part right here, right?
The other card. If you want to see the whole technique, you can watch the original video by clicking on the link in the notes. So in that video, I recommend you align the mirrors as a starting point. Now, some people will tell you that you should align the rear bumpers instead of the mirrors, and that is absolutely true. The thing is, if you're parking next to a car that is more or less the same size as your car, by aligning your mirrors, the rear bumpers will also be aligned. The reason why I tell—
All right, I'm getting to a point here. You're asking, like, why are we talking about parallel parking, right? Parallel parking is also a task that is done by acquisition. I wish someone had told me align the bumpers, make sure the mirrors are perfect. I had to, through trial and error, and angry people in the city of Oakland honking at me to move faster in traffic, learn exactly how to do it. But time and trial and effort made it easy to acquire. And the reason why you don't have to take another class in how to parallel park is because you're constantly doing it. So acquisition is number one, right? The other is repetition, how often you're able to do it. And so these are fundamental aspects of learning. So in our curriculum, what do we have in our curriculum that forces students to explain, that forces students to do things that require them to understand code? That is the heart of learning, right? And so what we have here is a quick snapshot of learning. There's three types. There's declarative knowledge. And this is what you think of as learning traditionally, right? I can explain it. And so semantic are things that you never experienced, but someone taught you. So the structure of an atom, right? You've never seen it, but you understand, you've been taught it, right? Episodic. And so these are, you can tell me the story of that day when that person knocked the ice cream out of your hand. It was traumatic, but you remember it, right? It's declarative. I can tell you the story. Procedural, right? I know how to do things, right? And then conditional, right? I know when to do it in what particular context. Now, if learning has these three critical dimensions, then the question is, which of these dimensions is most effective for teaching kids and particularly teaching code? Now, you told me, because I told you that I would tell you the simple thing, it's all about acquisition. So if we went to a different country, and I would mess it up. If I ask you what is the most efficient way to learn a foreign language, I can almost guarantee everyone would say, go to a foreign country, and then it requires you to speak that language on a daily basis. So here's the question. When we design curriculum for our children to learn code, are they required to use it? Can they speak broken Python? Are you giving them an opportunity to speak broken C+ until they get comfortable with the language? It's broken Java is to speak it, practice it, revise it, right? So the idea is anytime we have things in our long-term memory, it's because they're useful and they're needed every single day. Now, here's the problem. That assumes all the conditions are normal, that there's no anxiety, no self-doubt, no anger. So if I show up to school and I'm frustrated because I just got off the bus and it took longer because there was traffic and it was raining outside, and I walk into class and I'm in a CS class, right? I'm not motivated because why am I learning this? What is the value of learning these symbol systems? So we always need a why. So the big idea is acquisition is important. If you wanted to learn a foreign language, you told me it's always best to just go to another country and create the conditions of necessity, right? So idea number one is that if we're going to learn, acquisition is central. So here's the second part. There's a theory, it's called situated cognition, right? So the quick way to explain situated cognition is that we want to create situations that require deep understanding of the process. So for example, people who are phenomenal at measurement, carpenters, right? If you ask them to figure out the fractions, they're great at adding fractions because there's a saying in that business, right? We want to measure twice and cut once because it costs me to make a measurement mistake. That is why they're phenomenal at adding fractions, right? Because the chair and building the door requires that I master the mathematical process of adding fractions, right? Hopefully that makes sense. That's called situated cognition. I'm going to create a situation that drives learning, right? So wouldn't it be great to teach CS in that same way? I need to do something, and in the doing, I'm driven because I need to learn the code as a way to do something important. And this is where cultural relevancy starts to come into play. Now, necessity drives learning. I think we're clear there. So being in situations that require you to use information initiates long-term memory, right? You need information every day. If you need it every day, you probably hold on to it. Here's what I'm going to propose. You probably deleted every single phone number in your mind, except for a sibling or parent. That's the number you remember. And let me tell you why, because that's the crisis number. If I had a problem, got to call mama, that's the number I remember. And I deleted all the other ones. Cousins can't remember them. Friends can't remember them. Only those things that are necessary. Hopefully that makes sense. So think about it. If creating situations that require learning is the art of teaching well, then what about the situations that I see all the time? And this is where culturally relevant learning is often dismissed, and people just miss the point, right? So what you see here on the right, you see chicken marinating. What I see is a lesson on osmosis, right? If you believe that water is going to travel from one side of the membrane to the other side of the membrane, it has to go through the small pores in the particles, right? Small particles, we call them semi-permeable membranes, right? The seasoning has to be able to get in somehow, right? That is the story of osmosis. Now, I would teach it in that context, and here's why. Every time they go and see some marinating food, it triggers the memory. It's like punching that phone number in the phone. You can't forget the things that are needed and regularly involved in your life. More importantly, I'm now a community expert. So I can say, we know we need to use this marinade because the particles are smaller, right? As opposed to like dropping, it's a waste to put big globs of garlic in there because they're not going to cross the membrane. Kids love to know things, right? And more importantly, when you're between ages 3 and 15, they're phenomenal mastering languages. So why would it be hard to teach them computer science? It's just a language. I'm going to make the argument today is because you haven't given them anything to code worth value, right? The things that they are driven to do daily, right, are the things that they'll do often and do well. So what is it that we want them to code? So this is where culturally relevant pedagogy is used as probably the most overused and misunderstood phrase in education, in my opinion, because it is both philosophy and a teaching style. And by philosophy, Gloria Ladson-Billings wrote a beautiful book that basically said, ideologically, we can't lie to kids. Kids go into classrooms every day and every teacher lies. They say math is the most important thing, science is the most important thing. Then you go to your third period class and that's English and they're like, oh man, you got to learn to write because you'll never live in this world without being able to write. So if everything is important, that makes nothing important, right? So her argument is that we need to make sure that when we teach things in the context of what's really valuable and important in the kids' lives, because they'll never have to ask the question, is it important? So when we think about coding languages, what are they using coding for? Is it to make a website? That's great. But if that website doesn't drive something deeply passionate about who they are and impact their community lives, then they're not going to make that website twice. So the question is, if it's culturally relevant, I need to have them designing web pages that they'll do often because it really has a significant meaning in their lives. So for example, we tried this at a local school and we had them create a portfolio of the history of their community, right? So this was about, can we identify the people in our community who are change agents who make this world better, the people whose stories are never told. And so they had to learn the code as a way to honor grandmothers and honor uncles, right? And so we gave them a relevant context to learn code. I hope that makes sense, right? So by way of teaching though, so this is philosophy, but as a teaching method, it's very simple. You never walk into the room and say, today we're gonna learn about osmosis. You say, okay, does marinade really work? And if so, we need to prove it, right? So you create a topic that creates the necessity to learn the content. So in the case of coding languages, we're going to do something and we're going to learn coding as a tool to help us do something, right? So that might be creating, as I mentioned before, a history of our family. That might be, we're going to learn how to code Raspberry Pi. We're going to use Python so we can create support robots to help our grandmothers with groceries or something. We want to create a driven necessity. That is culturally relevant pedagogy at its essence. It is changing the topic, but it is also in the lesson when we ask kids to explain, because explaining produces understanding, you have to give them things to explain or do that are also connected to the context that they're interested in. And the lastly, final things, the summative assessments, 3 simple tools: change the topic during the lesson, give them an opportunity to explain what they've learned, but connect that to cultural context. And third, the final projects, they have to be celebrations of culture and community. You give them something to do that is empowering, where the code is a tool to change the world. Now, So this is the integration. So on the left is culturally relevant pedagogy. On the right, situated cognition. I'm going to save you the time. All of them say this: if you find the context that matters to the kids, they will learn because they have to learn, right? So as you design curriculum, it is all about context. That's good news, but here's the bad news. Kids in Oakland are different than kids in San Francisco. Kids in Alabama are different than kids in New York, right? The kids in 2 classrooms right next to each other in the same room are different. So what teachers need to be able to do is recognize, I need to teach the kids in front of me. So I need to figure out what drives these kids. And that's where cultural relevancy finds its strength. I mean, it's not so bad where you can't try the same thing, but it is often sold as a silver bullet, and it's truly not. It is about identifying the things that matter to your kids today, and we'll teach there, right? So by way of process, here's a simple 4-step process to doing it. So we train our teachers to use this method when they teach science. And the first is to always start their lesson with a community-based problem. So again, we're focused on acquisition. I'm identifying a problem that will require us to create some code. So right now, there are kids and families dealing with myths around vaccination, around COVID. We could do a unit right now on, we're gonna solve this myth issue by creating, here's a page, app where here's the truth. If we're teaching Unity or something like that, here's the truth about COVID, right? And that's the thing what we're going to do. But I'm going to use Unity to build an app that separates facts and myths, right? Then I'm going to tap into community expertise. And this is what's different. Now, the teacher is always the expert in a classroom, but people who adopt a culturally relevant pedagogy say this: let's go out to the community and bring their expertise in as well. Right? So that might be doing some interviews with people, going to find out local doctors, getting on the phone to figure out who can I talk to make sure I'm getting accurate information. You draw on community expertise. And I don't want to rush by this because this is important. I grew up in Oakland. I spent a lifetime of people saying everything great is elsewhere, right? You want to do something well, get out of Oakland, right? So imagine kids being in classrooms where everything that you value, your community, people are saying the good stuff is elsewhere. Well, culturally relevant pedagogy says, well, there's local expertise, let's tap into it, right? So identify a community problem. As you teach, let's connect to community expertise. And then the third part, I'm not sure if you all can see that because I'm having my mouse disappeared, is content and community coaching, meaning we actually teach the content, but kids are not active recipients. They are now producers of knowledge as well. So they learn and then they teach. Because if they have to teach, they understand. And the last thing we want to do is this 4-part approach in the curriculum is a community explanation. Now, if you built a community expert, right, we wouldn't just build a website or an app on COVID, right? We would actually teach people what we've learned and share it, right? That produces an incredible accountability when we allow kids to share their expertise publicly, right? So I'm trying to get through this quickly because I want to share some quick research and make sure we have plenty of time for Q&A, but this is a simple 4-step approach to teaching in the culturally relevant approach, and we use it in our teacher education program here on campus, right? Now, so for example, you might start a lesson. I'm trying to get rid of my box over here, but my mouse is disappearing, but we'll make it happen. So part 1 is I might initiate a lesson on the toxic water at McClymonds High School that was found last year. And so if the lesson is teaching code, and I want to make sure kids are comfortable with code, maybe we're building a website and we want to include in our stacking particular dimensions, right? We want changing pictures, we want videos, we want a live feed of text of some sort. Those are devices we want to embed, but we have to make sure we start by identifying this problem. So this website that we're going to build, that will be a community forum, is going to help us address this issue of toxic water in Oakland, right? So now it says learn code by reviewing websites. So we might identify websites to review. We create pages to tell the story of this issue, that, making sure we reflect why it's important. And then we replace features and images with pages and concepts that matter to them, making sure the kids have power to design it in their own way, right? But we reach out to the community to get local expertise, right? The other thing is it's simple teaching, right? So once there's a need to know, we make sure we're teaching simple content language, but we make sure that they're using it for a reason, right? This reason is the key and a huge distinction between the approach. And then finally, we make sure that there is a final presentation, that they're sharing their information to the community, that we actually build something, and that building is something that can be iterated. We can go back to it and continue to work. So the big idea is acquisition matters. If you want to have acquisition at a high level, well, the first thing you do is find out what the kids know and where they might know it so that you can teach in the context of the kids' culture. Now, I want to talk to you how important this is by sharing some simple research about what happens when we don't take careful care to the language of students. So for years, many of you have been in science classes or other classes, and teachers bombard you with a incomprehensible stream of complex language. They're like, well, inside of the nucleus is the nucleolus. The nucleolus is responsible for ribosome production, and ribosomes, they make protein, right? So two things happen when you hear that message. The first is, I don't know what you're saying. And two, you're telling me I don't belong here. So we made the argument, what would happen if I just made sure I separated the concept teaching from the language teaching? So we did a set of experiments years ago. So quick example. So in one group, we same image. One group got oxygen, carbon dioxide, photons, and water, and these are elementary school students. The other group got simpler language, good air that all living things need to breathe, air that humans breathe out, light, and water, right? And so what we found is across all measures, those on our treatment group, it's in the blue line, perform statistically significantly better on all measures. And so overall, 10% better just by separating the language. And if you look on the right, the fourth bullet point, this is when they had to write those answers themselves. We saw a huge difference in their learning by making sure that they understood the ideas first. Now, here's my concern for CS curriculum. It is language heavy. It is symbol heavy. If you don't make sure the ideas are clear first, and then you teach the symbols, the kids will find their way out, right? And we proved that through research. A second study, and this actually was done through the help of Allison Scott when she was working with SMASH programs. We wanted to see if academic content language produced stress in students, because if we bombard people with complex language, well, how do they feel? So same conditions. One group got simple science language. They watched the video with very simple language. The other group, it had complex science language, and we gave them two tests. These are called Stroop and flanker tests, and I'll explain that really quickly. So Stroop test on the left is if the word yellow is written in yellow, you click the Y button for yellow. But if the word yellow is written in red, you push the R button. And so it's you have to ignore the distraction, right? And so it's similar to, like, if you're trying to parallel park, you can do that without turning down the music, but turning down the music, it helps, right? So in these cases, you can identify what color it is, but if yellow is written in red, it's a distractor. So that is a Stroop test. On the right is a flanker test. The centermost arrow, you need to identify what that arrow is. Now, if all the other arrows are pointing the same way, that's congruent, it's easy. But if they're going the opposite way, again, got to turn the music down, a little more cognitively taxing. And so what we found was if we taught in a complex way using complex language, on the left-hand side, you can see those who are taught with complex language, the Stroop test, and this is the identifying the colors, they were significantly slower in being able to recognize that color. Like, it literally took up cognitive space. If you look under the column on the right under flanker, it says 600 milliseconds. Those who are taught with the complex language, trying to identify the arrow, they were also significantly slower, about 1,000 milliseconds compared to 690. And so this is researcher stuff, but here's the point. If the language is too complicated, you literally produce stress-like symptoms in your students. And so one, they don't understand it, and two, you stress them out. So part of what I want to argue is that we have a profound platform to do something important in the way that we teach now, and particularly digitally. So we did a third study, and I'll close right after this, but we tried to do this thing called racial matching. We asked this question: what if I teach in a way where the people who are in the instruction look like me? So our control group, we gave them all white female teachers because it's likely that's who they would learn from. And then our experimental group, we found someone that looked like them. And so on the left, maybe it's your right, I'm not sure, but the woman who had a hijab, she was teaching a young woman who had a hijab. And what we found was statistically significant learning for some groups, but greater appreciation for everybody. So here's the big idea. When you're teaching complex language like coding, they have to acquire it. Second, who's teaching it matters. So I would like to see faces that look like them, images that look like them, so we can reduce the anxiety. So imagine you're 12 and you're taught by another 12-year-old. How can I have psychological doubt about whether or not I can do it when the person who's teaching me looks like me, right? And so part of what I'm encouraging you to do is to press the envelope on what's possible with digital teaching. I'm gonna make sure we have time for questions. I wanna show you one more thing. So part of what we did in the past years, we've been working on virtual reality instruction. And we've been seeing, well, how can we send explicit cues to students to make sure they see that culture is important to them? So take a look at this. This is a science lesson. So in this case, we taught them about food chains. They're driving through San Leandro, and they asked them to identify the number of fast food restaurants, right? The music is Kendrick Lamar. We're trying to send them the message, you belong in this place. Science is for you, right? So in a moment, you're going to see a screen pop up, and it shows all of the local diabetes centers in their neighborhood. So the question is, we're trying to teach them about diabetes and how food health matters. But the reason why we did it in this context, because every time they drive through this neighborhood, it is going to be nearly impossible not to think about the lesson on food chains, because we taught it in a culturally relevant way, right? They've acquired that information. So every time they drive through the neighborhood, do you think when they pass McDonald's and mama says, hey, you wanna go to McDonald's, that those kids will say, yeah, we should do it? I would argue the connection to diabetes centers will reign supreme moving forward, right? We taught it in a context that matters so they can retain that information long-term. It's like punching that number in. So simple steps, I gotta be simple, right? So here's what I'm asking you to do. I'm impressed by the number of people here, and I'm also inspired by the Kapor Center's approach to take on and build something of this nature, a framework and direction for people to build curriculum that works, because curriculum that works is what people will use, right? So the first thing is teach code in context that matter, right? So I am coding things, but I have to figure out from the kids what matters to them, and they should be building and designing things that matter to them. If we do this, then kids won't have to ask the question of whether or not they should be involved in computer science, because they are involved in computer science. The second, teach code with a practice mindset. They have to do it, fail, and do it repeatedly. That's how language is learned in the first place. There's no such thing as a right answer. There's only stages towards better. And we need to think that as a fundamental framework for how we train kids in every context. It's especially important when learning language. The third thing, teach code to enact change. We cannot waste time with our lessons to tell the kids that this will matter later. It has to matter right now. Things that they can do today. They can make web pages documenting political practices, right? They can engage in a Black Lives Matter thing. They can build apps right now to engage in connective information about what's going on in the world. Why would we wait? If they do it now, they'll get better at it, and they'll never have to ask, why is it that I'm learning computer science? And lastly, code, revise, act, repeat. It's the fundamental aspects of teaching. If I was going to teach anything, I might change the word code, right? If I was teaching biology, it would be learn the science, revise it, let's get involved in some action, and repeat. Teaching is simple. It's about acquisition. So I'm excited to be a part of this project. I truly appreciate you all having me here. And I encourage you to tap deeply into the discussions around culturally relevant pedagogy, because it's proven to be effective and it's proven to be a change agent. So I have one thing I'd like to say before my close is that, look, I want this to be the first of many conversations. And so if I can be of help to you, happy to do it. Reach out to me. I'm on Twitter probably a little more than I need to be. And I have a book that kind of documents in detail what's going on. I also have a very bad computer science curriculum that is a computer science and engineering curriculum on my website that we built a couple of years ago. So you're happy to check that out. And again, thank you for having me today, and I look forward to questions.
Awesome. What a powerful presentation, Dr. Brown. Thank you so much for sharing so much of your knowledge, your insights, and your perspective on this really interesting subject matter. There's certainly a lot that we can take away from this presentation. And as promised, we want to be sure to address as many questions as we can. I think we started, and where are we now? Cynthia, Antoinette, Allison, what does it look like as far as our questions that are coming in?
We currently have 3 questions. I'm sharing my screen, so I can't view them. So
yeah, I just took a look. Okay, so it looks like Andrea has the first question here. And she said she'd like to know about what nonfiction books you would recommend on the high school level to complement any curriculum they're covering in classrooms.
That I don't know. I'm not well versed in the nonfiction text. So, or I mean fiction. Other than textbooks, I'm not really familiar with that. So I don't know what to say about that one. Sorry.
Okay. Let's see, the next question comes in from Alexis. She says, this is brilliant, thank you. Too many teachers do not live in the same community as their students. How do they work with their students to ensure that they are tapping into community expertise when they may not have knowledge about the community themselves?
Perfect. Brilliant question. And that's the heart of teaching is a people business. And so what we say, you can't teach well if you don't know who your kids are. And so for very real financial reasons, the teachers don't look like the kids in their community, but that should not hinder them from learning who those kids are. So there's a couple practices. The first is what we do called pre-assessments. Before we start a unit, we ask them, right? What do you know about? And you can fill in the blank. So let's say, for example, I would like to teach the kids about JavaScript, right? All I really need to know is, what are you really interested in? Like where do you spend your time online? Now, once I know that, I can then figure out, all right, how can I tap into the thing that they're into? So maybe YouTube, like kids love YouTube and they're following a particular YouTube. Can we build a YouTube equivalent page? I know Java won't do it, but you know, you'd have to figure out first where their interest is. And so the best way to do it is really simple, is ask them. You got to get them talking and you'll find out all you need to know.
Awesome. So we have another question. It says, Dr. Brown, can you please review your findings from the race teaching slide, the slide with the woman with the hijab?
Okay, so this is the challenge. I do research talk for professors and I don't want to bore you all with the details. So we called it identity matching. So about 60 students got identity matching. They look like them. The other 60 had a generic teacher, right? So what we found was, for a particular group, they learned better. And so this was for, it's interesting, it was like Pacific Islander and Southeast Asian students had better learning when taught by people who look like them. And we couldn't figure it out, right? So part of the issue was maybe that these are the kind of people who don't see themselves represented in media very often. And there's this thing called a parasocial identity, where we develop a fictitious relationship with characters, right? So when Jon Snow died, people were like, oh my God, Jon Snow was real. Dude was still alive, right? But we felt some kind of way. So here's the point. Maybe we triggered that for that particular group of people. The second finding was everybody liked it more. So all of the kids who had someone who looked like them felt better about learning, right? So why wouldn't we do that? Video games have already figured that out. They let you customize yourself all the time, but we don't do that when we're teaching. We don't pay much attention to it.
We have another question from Precious. She said, what classroom activities and projects have you seen do a great job in learning about students' interests and identities?
Oh, it's called lunch and conversation. I mean, it's not very complicated. You have to talk to your kids. What are you reading today? Give me 5 websites. And I'll give you a trick that I learned as a teacher. Kids feel obligated to give you the answers to list. If you say, I need you to list 5 things, they'll do it. I don't know what it is, but if you say, hey, tell me what you think about politics, they're not going to do that. So you say, tell me 3 politicians and why you like them. They'll give you that list, right? So here's my message to you. If you really want to know, all you need to do is ask a couple of kids, give me the 3 websites you visited this week, right? Give me the 3 things that you thought you wanted to learn about computer science. If you wanted to build something, what 3 things would you build out of robotics? You get all the information you need right there.
All great tips. So here's another question. How can we make sure that our pedagogy is culturally engaging when our students themselves come from multiple diverse cultures and communities?
So that's a great question. I get this one all the time. So if you have 35 kids in a classroom from Oakland, and it's going to be diverse, that's the nature of the context, right? But they share a culture, and that shared culture is what you're shooting for. So they'll probably listen to the same music, right? Do you know if we're going to a 9th grade classroom right now? I'm interested in this one in the chat. What are the kids listening to, right? Do you know what kind of web pages where do they buy their clothes, right? What are the sites that give them directives? What vlogs do they listen to? Who's their favorite person, right? So there's collective culture in every diverse community, and that's what you're trying to tap into. And that's why you can't assume. You got to get a chance to get to know the kids, and you design it for those particular kids. I don't have any answers about what the kids are listening to. Come on, people, where have we been? What's going on with my chat today?
I hear you. I'm not entirely sure either. I have to go ask some of my young people.
Gotta ask the kids. Gotta ask the
What
kids.
they like to listen to. Because yeah, what I thought they liked, it changed like a week ago. So another question that was actually in the chat, which I think you've talked quite a bit about this, but it was early on, and it said, please define culturally relevant computer science programs using the lens of attracting and especially retaining. So see, in an existing computer science program in a suburban high school. So I think that's Southern California, and an existing computer science program in a suburban high school. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you, Kyle, by the way. Kyle coming through for me in the clutch. Thank you, Kyle. I would say there's two conflated issues. One is curriculum, and the other is matriculation. So there's something that's really interesting about people who go on a graduate study in computer science and in sciences in general. And those are people who tend to have some kind of substantive experience in high school. They went to a camp. They were involved in a program. So that is about experiences and identity, not necessarily curriculum. We're just talking about curriculum first. Curriculum can do a lot. And let me tell you why curriculum can do a lot. Because teachers have to make individual decisions about how to design their curriculum to meet the needs of their students. And each teacher is then needed to do it. But if you make a national curriculum and a curriculum is embedded with good learning principles and cultural relevancy keys, then more people have access to excellent teaching because it's embedded in the curriculum. Now, when you talk about matriculation, that's a much bigger issue. It's not just about the curriculum. It is also about the identity of the kids themselves. And so I can't emphasize this enough. There's a ton of work about stereotype threat, cued recall, which is to say, if I send you a subtle cue that you don't belong, everything that is evidence of your lack of belonging will send you away, right? So if I'm nervous, I'm the only, Latinx kid, and I'm in a classroom, and I'm gonna get to the class, and the music that the teacher playing is music I don't like. The things that they're talking about, things that I don't like. You're sending messages of doubt, and so people interpret their failure or struggle as I shouldn't be there, as opposed to it's just hard, I got to get through it. So here's the point: we have to separate curriculum from the identity development of I see myself engaged in this career, and we have to be explicit about that as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay, we've got another question. It came in from Janice. It says, what computer science language do you suggest learning first?
So I'm going to speak secondhand because I learned all of this with my guy, DeVarge Brown, who built a curriculum together. So he was suggesting ambitiously Python because you can build robots. And so if you can program a Raspberry Pi using Python, you have greater flexibility. You can do more independently, right? Everyone says Scratch. Everyone says, so someone says block languages. So I don't know that I would recommend everything, but I saw with my own eyes, kids who could tackle Python early and could build things, they couldn't turn them away, right? Because now it was this connection to engineering, but I'm biased. But here's my point. Anything that gives them value right away is what they'll stick with. So the question is, if they build something, why would I build it again, right? So think about it. Awesome. Someone says it's not Java, agreed.
Okay, here's another question that came in. How can teachers and educators work towards culturally responsive assessment practices?
So that's interesting. So the assessment is the tail that wags the dog in most cases. So people want to know, how did the kids learn? So let's say you take a 9th grade curriculum right now. What's the standard for 9th grade computer science on a national level? What do we expect every kid to know? So if you ask about culturally relevant assessments, I would argue that we need to make things that the kids want to make. But I don't know that you can pull that off right now because we're not even at a position where the standards have been adopted uniformly. Districts have not even made computer science a uniform platform for what they want to do, right? So I would be hesitant to prescribe anything regarding assessments yet because there's not a national assessment that is functional just yet.
Awesome.
Can I ask a quick question of Dr. Brown?
Yes, please, Allison.
Awesome. One of the First of all, thank you so much. I'm honestly like learning a ton through your presentation as well. One of the things that I have heard continuously, and I'd love your response to, is what is the biggest misconception that you hear around like what is culturally relevant pedagogy and curriculum? So like what are some mistakes? What are some things we should not be doing?
So it is presenting it in a way that is called culturally relevant. So I'm going to present a rap song that raps about how important coding is, or raps the basics of a particular coding language, and that's culturally relevant. The issue is that it assumes so much. So the idea that you can put anybody in a block. Well, all Latinx kids will like it if it's done this way. All Black kids will like it if it's done this way. That's the problem, and that's not what she talked about. What I found is people don't read the original text around cultural relevancy, so they don't really understand the ideas about context driving understanding. So it's not about presentation. So here's the least efficient mode of learning, what I'm doing right now. A person talking, you sitting and doing nothing. So if you make that fancier by, I don't care who you can have the baby rapping the lyrics, little baby, NBA Youngboy rapping about the particular language. I can't remember it unless I do something with it. And so that is the biggest mistake in my eyes.
Thank you. Kalisha, I think there's one more question from Dan.
Yes, yep, I just saw it. So he says to you, Brian, you said you had a bad computer science curriculum available. Did you mean bad meaning bad, or bad meaning good?
And he said, in the words of Run, knowing Dan, it's going to be a great hip hop reference.
That's pretty funny. Bad in that we didn't finish it. That it is just a shell. We tried to. I'm a proponent of integrated engineering and computer science, because if you're going to build something, you'll likely be to build the hardware and then coding it as well. So we tried to do that, but we didn't get very far. So it's on my website. You feel free to take a look, and it's basically teaching elementary school kids how to build basic things and then use coding language to make robots functional. And it's a way to get them introductory level access to computer science. So bad in that I've got a lot of work to do. Well, the people that I work with have a lot of work to do. So.
Awesome. Well, we have a few minutes left, and we do want to share some information with you, but just for the good of the order, are there any last burning questions for Dr. Brown while he's with us? Okay, I haven't seen anything pop in. So I am going to ask for the next slide. This has certainly been a delight, Dr. Brown. Thank you so much for sharing all of your insights. It has been wonderful, and I'm really looking forward to continuing to work with you on this project.
Thanks, Kalisha. Have a good day.
You're welcome. All right, so thank you all so much for joining us today. Here's what you can expect in the coming months. The completion of our computer science teacher survey. If you're interested in participating and have not yet, we invite you to do so as soon as you can. The survey is scheduled to close very soon, and this is the link that's available. Someone asked about that question, and this is the Qualtrics link that's available. In August, we'll launch our monthly newsletter. Please sign up by visiting our webpage listed here and click on the button that says Join this initiative. And lastly, our August webinar will focus on the digital divide and equitable computer science instruction. So stay tuned for more information, another really engaging conversation with two already amazing people, and we're aiming for one more. And we just appreciate all of your time. We know that you could be anywhere, literally, today, and we're just so glad to have you with us. So thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Is it ideal? Well, no, not quite. But hey, this is formula, then I guess that's your formula. What do you do when the bad moves? You can make it step at you. What do you do when the love runs low and you know it won't last long? Where do you go? floating like a bubble made of soap. Yo, check the colors in the sun. There's no denying that I'm dope. Looking like a rainbow bomb as I'm coming around. Listen for the pop, never makes a sound. Another man down, another man down. Under the offers, there's no big older, trying to focus my mind. Yeah. Feeling I'm so through, get things conversation.